in terms of First World War artefacts, the volunteers recovered 2 of these intact angle iron trench pickets, some expanding metal, otherwise known as XPM, and these were both evidence of the trench furniture and likely dated to the First World War period. However, the particular form, I might actually, add that these trench pickets are not in situ, so they would have more than likely have been standing upright and supported and riveted and pushed, supported the sandbagging in situ. They've been sort of moved, replaced, displaced from their original location. So where was I? Sorry. So in terms of the artifacts, we only recovered the 2 angle iron trench pickets and some of the expanding metal. And of course, the particular form, however, is what we've used, and that's what I've been sort of saying to you about the fact that we use the archive book, the manuals to illustrate the particular form and shape and structure of a feature. And we're able to identify the trench tooth is firmly, we're able to place that very firmly as a relic trench associated with earthworks relevant to the First World War period and most likely 1915 in date. Other interesting artifacts, whilst they weren't First World War related, we recovered the remains of an armour-plated range cover. Originally, we thought this lump of metal, which weighed a ton, was sort of possibly related to one of the earlier vehicles that might have been on the estate during the use by the North Irish Horse, small tanker, small armoured vehicle of some nature. But speaking with some colleagues at the Armoured Trials and Development Unit and a couple of other museums over the water, discovered that it was actually a hinged cover that was used to, was installed and used to protect parts of the modified ranges when they basically were electrified. And it was used as part of to protect the range infrastructure, such as electric junctions, the comms equipment, target machinery, generators and pulleys. And this was to protect them from direct or indirect fire as a result of use of the range. The covers were hinged for easy maintenance, and the bevel, as you can see, it sits up in a sort of a dome shape. This prevented the plate from falling flat, which would have made it very difficult to lift, of course, but also made it easily identifiable in the range if somebody had accidentally left it open or had been knocked open. We also recovered a base of a 1943 reconditioned 40mm Bofors shell casing. This possibly has originated from one of the anti-aircraft guns that were located at Magilligan. I'm not sure how it ended up in our trench, but it had clearly been fired. But yeah, any more information anybody's got on the use of that there, please give me a shout, let me know, it'd be good to know. So moving on, I'm going to give you some info here on Trench 3. This is slightly more complex on the basis that there was 3 sort of separate features within it. But anyway, it was positioned to take in a cross section of the 2 seemingly related features that we could see on the surface. And they were initially thought to be the backfilled vestiges of a First World War sort of, I call them an S-type trench, and they are sort of, they're less angular and less structured. And it was also we thought we might have had the possible remains of a shallow dugout, which, excuse me. And as you can see from the pre-excavation photos, which is the large photo on your the left-hand side of the screen there, the targeted features were actually quite different in form when compared to the right angle view of the crenellated feature we had identified in Trench 2. And in fact, 3 distinct features actually emerged during the excavation of Trench 3. So I've labelled them 3A, B and C. Features 3A and C were most likely representing configurations of the early S-type trench from 1914. And again, how do we know this here? Well, we have the 1914 British Army Handbook Manual, and that includes examples of this type of field fortification, which was used prior to the adoption of the static crenellated frontline trench that we identified in Trench 2. And as such, we were able to compare the construction methods employed to create the trench with the field manuals to actually accurately date the features. And you can see the view, just the two screenshots there of the fire and cover trenches that were taken from the Army Handbook of 1914 from the War Office Manual. Okay. Consistent with Trench 2, we identified evidence of substantial sandbag revetment and breastworks, which were evident in both features 3A and 3C, but most notably within feature 3C. 3A presented evidence of modern reuse, which I found actually quite interesting. And although the reuse was actually clearly visible during the excavation, it really and truly respected, it largely respected the traces of the original practice trench, and was in essence, rather than a recutting of the original trench, it was representative of an episode of scraping out rather than complete recutting of the original feature. And this was thought most likely to be contemporary with feature 3B, which, rather than being the dugout that it might have hoped we thought it might have been or had hoped it had been, it was actually found not to be a dugout or a bunker, but in fact the remains of a shallow foxhole dugout from a later, more modern period of use. That was just the sort of end result. Basically, you've got 3A, B, and C there, and you can see the three different sort of section views in association with the trench drawing from the excavation itself. If anybody's any more questions on these things, you can obviously ask me them later. I hope I'm not going too fast. Okay, so moving on anymore. Actually, I might have a bit more. So the remains of collapsed and in situ sandbag material was also uncovered from both the relic trench features in 3A and C. And this was also originally used to revet the sides of the upper levels of both of the relic trenches, which again, we believe they were constructed in a similar breastwork fashion to that was already revealed in Trench 2. Unfortunately, no artifacts were recovered associated with the First World War period of use, but nevertheless, we did get indication of post-World War II activity. And that was revealed during the excavation of the deposit 310, which sort of, this included remains of degraded food, animal bones, a mess tin, and components from a British Army general purpose machine gun rifle cleaning kit, which you can sort of see here on the bottom left-hand side. We've no idea what it was. Took quite a few people till we got to the conclusion of it. A defiling tool, but excuse me. What you can actually see here, well, perhaps one of the most interesting features, which provided by the excavation of Trench 3, where we exposed the interface of the upper S-type trench of 3C, and the traces of it could be seen to sort of continue southeast of the excavation trench. I've that highlighted in yellow here with a dashed line, and the green dashed line represents what actually all that remained of the rear of the fire trench. The series of dark lenses, etc., and the spread of the context 318 were encountered behind and below the context 310. So you have the bulk layer, and then you have this series of sort of sandbag layers, as you can see them in the illustrations far clearer. You see the layers coming down. They're quite extensively damaged, but you can still see the significant sort of differences between the colours. But these were almost certainly the remains of the relic sandbags, both in situ and those that appeared to be have collapsed from the discovered wall at this north end of the trench. We could see that the edges of the relic trench were clearly demarcated by the banding of these sandbag deposits, lining the original trench cut and preventing the friable side from collapse, bowing and slumping. The vestiges of these sandbags illustrated the movement of some of the sandbags and deposits around them, but also that the modification could be identified, that the trench had been hugely changed over time. Unfortunately, the Trench 3 area in more recent times has been heavily disturbed due to tree planting and the development of a stripwood in the area during the 1980s, during what was known as the Cold War period. This is reflected in the planting of the large areas of conifer woodland across the training estate. These were designed to replicate the Eastern European landscape and provide a range of buffer zones during live firing. This type of training continues today, with the area around Trench 3 continually used as a fieldcraft training unit or training zone. And in spite of the disturbance to the area in and around Trench 3, the investigation was again very valuable. It provided insight into the periods of active use for the training trenches, as well as identifying various construction techniques employed, and once more highlighted the use of the breastwork style parapets. And overall, the excavation was successful concerning the identification and the study of the features that were associated to the First World War. However, as mentioned, we didn't yield a large artefact assemblage, except of course for the recovery of the 2 angle iron trench pickets and some of the expanding metal and its associated nails. But nevertheless, the lack of material culture within this First World War landscape and this context isn't unique to Ireland, with some of the sites in Britain having similarly produced few finds. The construction of the trenches identified can, however, using the historic archive, equally be used to date the trenches on the morphological grounds to the First World War. Of course, we can't forget that a key element of this project was to connect the local people and the young and old with the First World War heritage landscape in the area. And by working in collaboration with the MOD, DIO, and Landmark Surfaces, and Andrew and the Causeway Coast and Glens people, we successfully facilitated an immensely enjoyable community engagement programme with numerous adult volunteers and over 90 school children from local schools, including Tarkenese Primary School, Ballyhacket Primary School, Foyle College and Limavady Central, all enthusiastically took part in the activities. They got great fun out of it. The weather was diabolical. I think we'd a storm, we'd all seasons in one day. And of course we lost some kids and a couple of the schools, etc., due to the ongoing COVID situation at the time. But as you can see from this here, everybody got stuck in with smiles on their faces and they all had great crack, and hopefully we'll be able to replicate this and more by the time we come round to doing the second phase of it. In addition to those school kids, the project, we were also able to support 2 undergrad students for the duration, and they were able to gain some very valuable field experience, which, to be fair, they were probably the only students that did, because there's been no field work for students really since, well, all of last year and so far this year. But importantly, and because of the excavations, a fuller understanding has been developed, gained on the relic trench systems, including the level of preservation and the use of the structures. It has been determined that the earthworks were, yes, indeed, First World War practice trenches designed to provide new recruits with the essential training in the practice of spade work and entrenchment. And the excavated features are now an important facet of the evidence of the past training infrastructure at Magilligan. And these results then will inform further archaeological investigations and the ongoing management of the historic elements of the estate's estate's landscape. I feel like I've actually ran through this. I hope I haven't gone too quickly for anybody. As I said, I think obviously Andrew's recording this here, and if anybody wants to ask any questions, but I must say a huge thank you to, there's so many people that really were amazing to us. And I've mentioned MOD, DIO for the funding, and Stanley McShane, of course, down at Magilligan, who was just fantastic, and Richard Osgood, senior archaeologist and advisor at Defence Infrastructure. But all the schools, and of course we have the Higgins family, who literally you have to drag them off site. They love their archaeology. with the Limavady Royal British Legion, and we had immense support from the 2 Royal Irish, Stevie Scarborough, and members of the 2nd Battalion in the Royal Irish. Their recruitment and community engagement team sort of transported all our equipment and dug us out of a hole, and literally, in terms of transport backward and forward once COVID kicked in and lockdown kicked in. And of course, we've got to thank the HED members, Ronan McHugh, Emma McBride, and the designation branch for HED, Department for Communities. But I kind of think that's sort of, yeah, that's me. I hope that was okay for everybody.